Good morning. It is a special privilege for us to have Mr. Kerby Anderson in our chapel today. Kerby is a longtime friend, adjunct faculty member over the years, distinguished specialist in so many fields. He has a mind like a file cabinet, and you just name the letter and he's got the files, and it's amazing to watch God work through him. He really is one who loves the Lord with all of his heart, soul, and mind, and especially his heart and mind coming together that presents what you will hear and puts some things in perspective, as you'll see. He's the national director for Probe Ministries International, holds a master's degree in science from Yale University and a master's degree in government from Georgetown University. Probe was founded in 1973 to present the gospel to communities, nationally and internationally, by providing lifelong opportunities to integrate faith and learning and training people to love God and equipping the church to engage the world for Christ. He may say something about the website, but if you want a phenomenal resource of short presentations that captures the essence of so many issues that we face and that you will face in ministry, I would encourage you to take advantage of that. He's the host of Point of View on the USA Radio Network, a regular guest on Primetime America with the Moody Broadcasting Network, Fire Away on American Family Radio. He's written a number of books. He's married to Suzanne, and they have 3 adult children. Kerby, it's a privilege to have you here. Lord bless you. Welcome, Mr. Kerby Anderson.
Thank you, Mark. We always enjoy interviewing Mark. Matter of fact, last time he was on, I think it went pretty well, except, of course, I guess we did have that one caller that wanted to argue for replacement theology and put you on the spot, but otherwise, we certainly enjoy having him on radio. I'm on, again, radio today. I guess this is my only commercial if you want to listen to it from 1 to 3 AM 1480 here and 360 stations around the country. The Probe radio program is on about 600 stations, and we've got everybody from Louis Gohmert on today talking about ISIS to all sorts of other topics. So we'll have a lot of fun, and we'll get lots of phone calls. But what I want to do, turn with me, if you have a Bible, to Colossians 2:8, because I wanted to just say a few things and then encourage you to go to those microphones and you can ask any question, but I'm going to say a little bit about what I think is really one of the great challenges for us in the 21st century in terms of missions and ministry, and I'll explain that more in just a minute. But here, as Paul is writing, he talks in Colossians 2:8, see to it that no one takes you captive by philosophy and empty deceit, according to the human tradition and according to the elementary spirits of the world, not according to Christ. And here he's warning us not to be taken captive, not to become culturally captive. In other places in 2 Corinthians, he talks about the fact that we should take every thought captive to the obedience of Christ. But here, he's warning us, as he does in Romans 12, not to be conformed to this world. And I think one of the great dangers that we've always faced in the Christian world is how easy the culture can take us captive. And I think of all sorts of people I've interviewed recently, whether it's Oz Guinness, whether it's Nancy Pearcey. So many of them have written about this issue of cultural captivity. So maybe to get us thinking today, I wanted to spend just a little bit of time talking about the influence of media and how I think this is one of the great challenges for us in the 21st century. If it was a danger for Christians to be taken captive in the first century, I think it's even more dangerous today. George Barna, who's been on my program many times before, and we spent a lot of money with George Barna doing perhaps the most extensive survey of born-again millennials that's ever been done in history. George Barna has pointed out that he has tried to estimate what he calls sources of significant influence. What are the things that influence people? And he concluded that the sources of significant influence were movies, television, the internet, books, music, public policy, and law, and family. Now, if you go back and look at those first 5, what do they have in common? They're all the media. Now, when he published that in Christianity Today, he actually got more letters to the editor than almost any article they'd received that year, and the reason for it was the next line. He concluded that the church was not even in the top 12 sources of influence. Now imagine if we could go back in time to the founding of Dallas Theological Seminary. We'll do it back to the future style. We'll park a DeLorean out here. We'll go back to, and now we're here with Louis Sperry Chafer. And we go out and we do the same survey to Americans at that time. What do you think would be the top 2? Church and family, don't you think? today, look at how far down family is and how much further down the church is. And so I think we have to recognize that we are, in a sense, going to be doing ministry in what I call a media storm. We have been able to estimate that by the time a typical person graduates from high school, he or she will have seen 22,000 hours of television. They will have spent about 11,000 hours in a classroom. So that gives you an idea. And again, this is America, but as we go across the oceans, we see some of the same phenomenon happening. They will have spent about 11,000 hours listening to music. That first study comes from Nielsen Corporation. You know, AC Nielsen spends millions and millions of dollars to find out which TVs are on, what channel they're tuned to, and who is watching them. The second one comes more from diaries, but it was in the Journal of the American Medical Association, estimating that the average teenager in America listens to about 10,500 hours of music. And that study was done before the full market penetration of the iPod and the iPhone. I think those numbers are going to go up. The number of hours in front of a computer, hard to estimate because now we have cell phones, but this study comes from the University of California, San Diego, about 13,000 hours. You add to that video games, movies, videos, books. You are recognizing that you are trying to get your message of the gospel, your message of discernment, of discipleship, whatever it might be, through a media storm. To give you a better look at this is a graph I've created from some numbers. So this is my graph, but if you want to steal it, it's back on the computer there. You can take any of the things I'm showing you here and use them in your ministry. This, by looking at the numbers, you can see something very interesting, and that is the amount of television in the blue, hours watching television has increased. Music has increased, and I think is going to increase even more dramatically the next time the survey is done, which should be this year. The amount of computer usage has increased. The amount of video game usage has increased. One has actually decreased, the number of hours spent reading, and then movies are about the same. And so what you have in 2009, and now they're going to be doing a new one, so I'll put those up as soon as those numbers come in, is the average young person, 8 to 18, actually consumes almost 11 hours of media in 8 hours. You say, how do you get 11 hours in 8 hours? Multitasking. You know what I'm talking about, don't you? Right? You know, the television is on, you're texting, you're supposedly doing your work all at the same time. So that is that idea of multitasking. So again, the first issue that I think we're going to have to deal with is obviously the sheer amount of media consumption and how that can have a very powerful influence in having people become culturally captive or conforming to the world. The second thing, and I wanted to talk about one other one before you go to the microphones. As a matter of fact, if you want to go to the microphones right now and ask a question about anything, I'm just putting media on here as the first topic. We also recognize that it isn't just computers and television and movies. It's something else, and that is those smartphones that most of us have in our pockets right now. I can say a lot of things, but there are a few issues that are beginning to surface. And the first one is the issue of concentration. That is what is called the distraction overload. We recognize that if indeed an interruption comes at a natural stopping point, then that doesn't cause a great deal of disruption. But if it comes at an inopportune time, you get that "where was I" brain lock. Now, I'm old enough now to recognize that sometimes I walk into a room and I say, why did I walk into this room? What was I going to do? But I'm talking about something a little bit more significant than that. And so we're recognizing that that's interrupting kind of the thoughtful flow that people have. In addition to this, a lot of people say, well, that's okay because I can multitask. And you've heard that said before, right? You know, we've seen situations where you're talking to somebody and they pull out their phone. Or you're in a meeting, or maybe even in class, dare I say, and you're paying attention to something on your computer rather than what the professor might be saying. Well, we now know from brain studies that you are not multitasking. What you actually are indeed doing is multi-rapid fire switching of attention. And we now know from a lot of very good brain studies that the focus is on one and then the other is in background. The focus actually takes away your possible attention to the secondary issue, can drop by as much as 40%. That's why when I was driving down today on 75 and I saw somebody on the phone, I gave them wide berth because they probably were spending more time thinking about what was on the phone than what was on the road. And that's why some of you maybe even have come from states where you cannot drive with a cell phone to your ear. We certainly do not allow people to text, but we recognize that it is something that is of great concern. But in addition to one C, I'll put one more C up there, in addition to the issue of concentration is also the issue of creativity. And if you've been watching some of the studies that have been done, I don't know how many of you love TED Talks, that's kind of an addictive, fun thing to do. A lot of people have been talking about creativity, and back when Prof. Hendricks was teaching the class on creativity, a lot of us were recognizing that there is a substantial decrease in creativity in the Western world today. There seem to be some good reasons for it, but one of those is there isn't any kind of think time, any daydreaming time. This is where your brain puts together sometimes unrelated things and puts them together. A number of years ago, I had an opportunity to teach a Bible study, and every person in the Bible study was either in the arts field or in advertising. A lot of people in advertising. It was interesting when you would talk to those individuals and ask them, when did some of the most creative ad campaigns come about? To a person, it was when I was shaving, or for the ladies, when I was putting on makeup, when I was driving in a car, when I was in the shower. It's when your mind was kind of blank. But in this 24/7 situation where every moment, by the way, it's amazing this long is gone without a cell phone going off, but that is rather unusual when I speak to especially a college audience. You can see how that has changed and affecting, I think, in some negative ways, the issue of creativity. One more, and then I'm going to open up for some questions. So if you want to go to the microphones right now, we'll cue those up. But that's the issue also of media addiction. And when George Barna first wrote about that a number of years ago, I said, yeah, everything's an addiction. But he, I think, convinced me in his article, because if you look at the signs of addiction that are in, for example, the American Psychiatric Association, you can see very clearly that individuals oftentimes are addicted. More recently, somebody said that if you think about it, our cell phones are like mini slot machines. That is, in a slot machine, when you hit, I'm only saying this because I've never done it, but when you hit a, whatever those are called, all the cherries or whatever, the jackpot, that's what it's called. That shows you how much I know about it. That your brain goes off and it gives you a positive neurochemical hit of dopamine. Well, when your phone goes off, since you don't know if it's good or bad, and most of the time it's something, it gives you that same kind of hit. And so people are actually saying that there is very good evidence for media addiction. If you don't think so, the best example I can use is one of my colleagues at Ministries also teaches a class in technology. Matter of fact, he's co-teaching a class this semester at University of Texas at Dallas on the history of technology. But in his previous classes on technology, he has a requirement that every student go through a 24-hour technological fast. Now, how do they do that? Well, each student is to hand to him their iPhone or their smartphone. There are students in the class that will take a 0 on that assignment because they cannot bring themselves to be away from their phone for 24 hours. Are you with me on this? There may be some in the room that are saying, I'm not sure I could do that either. And again, this is one of the great challenges for us, I think, in the 21st century. Let me mention that some of this is in my book, Christian Ethics in Plain Language, or as certainly Mark mentioned just a minute ago, probe.org. We have a lot of different articles there that might be of interest to you. But let's, if I can now, stop. We can blank the slides here and see if you would like to ask a question or make a comment. I certainly am open to talking about all sorts of things. As a matter of fact, as I was telling Mark just a minute ago, when we do our radio programs, sometimes it feels like Sesame Street, because lately I've said, this program is brought to you by the letter I, because today we're talking about ISIS and Israel and Iran and Iraq. We might get to immigration and a variety of other things, but it is amazing. So I am willing to take questions or comments on just about any topic that you would like to address. And we'll go back and forth between each one of the microphones. I'll let you start us off.
You had mentioned that creativity has been decreasing in the Western world. And so I'm wondering what you think that has to do with the church today, especially with some churches implementing a lot of new creative elements and modernizing the church, and then there's some evangelicals that push back on that. And so I think that there's kind of two different spectrums when it comes to creativity in the church. So
Very good. Yes, and I do say that there is a great deal of creativity and innovation, and I think every church is going to have to ask themselves, what am I going to be able to do to reach our target generation? And so I think there are different gifts and different callings. Certainly, I think there are different church opportunities, different kinds of questions about music and order and the use of media and those kinds of things. So that is certainly the case. And so I'm not saying that we've lost our creativity, but I am saying that there seems to be a general loss in creativity. And I think part of that, and there are a lot of reasons that people are speculating. So I'm just giving you one of a list. But one of those is that there isn't as much, think time, creative time. And I remember Prof. Hendricks used to say that one time he was talking to this one individual who was having a struggle, and he said, you don't have any think time. There's no solitude. Doesn't the scriptures talk about solitude? There's no time for biblical meditation, for reflection. Certainly you think of Psalm 46, be still and know that I am God. I mean, could be easily translated chill and know that I am God. But the bottom line is, everybody's in this fast-paced, frenetic lifestyle, and I think one of the effects of that, there are many, but one of the effects of that is, I think, a loss of creativity. But at the same time, let's endorse and encourage people to use creativity. We take the changeless message of the gospel to a changing world, and certainly there are various ways we should and could do that. Yes? Sure. I'll answer one part of it, but if I miss it, you can come back and ask me another one. But let me take the attention span because, as you might have guessed, this is from a presentation that takes an entire hour. As a matter of fact, sometimes I do it in 90 minutes, but I did this one the other day at Oak Cliff Bible Fellowship. Tony Evans had me come in and speak on that. And one of the slides I left out was on the issue of attention span, because there is a fairly significant amount of evidence coming in to show that we are shortening the attention spans, as illustrated by the fact that even as I've been up here speaking, some of your minds have wandered, haven't they? Let's be honest, right? If your professor is really trying to keep your attention for an hour class, if they can keep your attention for 40 minutes of that hour class, they're doing really well. And there's reasons for that. Without getting too technical, we know from brain studies of what is now called neuroplasticity. In other words, the brain is very plastic. We used to think that it was sort of hardwired, and then you put the software on it. Turns out the brain itself is very plastic, and that's a good thing in that it helps you develop other neurons. And so if you are working as a musician, for example, you're going to develop certain parts of your brain associated with that. A good example of that is my sister-in-law is a violinist in the symphony. And if you were to look at her brain, because she holds her violin here, this part of her brain associated with her fingers is much larger than it probably is in yours, or would be in a beginning violinist, so that you can build up parts of your brain. Likewise, you can also, if you don't do certain things, atrophy certain parts of your brain. Well, that doesn't just happen from birth to 5. We recognize that happens all the way through your life. More significantly when you're younger, but still significantly when you're older. There is a very good book out called The Shadows, and it's talking about what the internet is doing to our brains. And in there, he's making a very good case that we have for many years been shrinking people's attention span. Let's go back to my generation. There was a book that came out a number of years ago, and somebody asked him why that book had short sections, and he said, well, you can read each one of the chapters in about 8 minutes. And somebody said, why 8 minutes? Well, the typical television program has 8-minute segments. And already he was recognizing in the 60s and 70s that people were only focusing on about 8 minutes of content. Let's go from 8 minutes of content to Twitter. What is Twitter? 140 characters. Can we communicate the gospel 140 characters? Do you see the problem we're having? This is, in some respects, because of this fast-paced kind of lifestyle that we have, and because of the way in which we go on to a computer. Just think about when you have that mouse in your hand. You're checking this, you're checking that, you're jumping back and forth, you're following all sorts of links and things of that nature. It's sort of ADD or ADHD on steroids, isn't it? Just a little bit. And so as a result, we are shrinking our attention span, which again, I think is a great challenge for us in the 21st century. I still think we can communicate. Gets back to that issue of creativity. We're going to have to figure out ways to more creatively explain the gospel and disciple individuals, but we are recognizing now that because of the neuroplasticity of our brains, individuals don't concentrate as much. We're moving as more from kind of a Bible-based, linguistic-based, word-based kind of culture into a visual culture. These are some major challenges we're going to have to face, which is why we have a media arts program here, don't we? Matter of fact, my last 3 producers of Point of View have all been graduates of the media arts program here at Dallas Seminary. Let's get another question, though. Yeah, I don't even think it's on, so just keep talking loudly and we'll get there. There it is.
It just seems like in the United States, it seems like we're just focused on constantly being busy. You know, you mentioned the cell phone, always looking at the cell phone, never really having time to do anything, just almost like constantly busy. And the information we receive, it just seems like we're getting more and more information. That it's like we're overwhelmed with information, and it's garbage coming from everywhere. So if everyone is, I guess, the recipient of the garbage we receive in the media, then how do we sift through all this to just focus on stuff so that it's not just garbage? I mean, and how do we become effective communicators when we know that we're competing with all this other media where, you know, anyone can be an expert and say whatever they want, and we don't even know the source of the information, and it just carries throughout the world.
Very good question. Yeah, first of all, we need to teach, I think, people in the church, this is one of those needs, discernment. I mean, if there was important to have discernment in the first century, it's even more important in the 21st century. And to really begin to help people understand that they may want to go to places which are trusted resources, you know. Moody used to say, the name you can trust. You know, I think in some respects we want to talk about the information you can trust, the news you can trust. Where are your trusted sources? How do I evaluate whether or not what I hear is true? Because we are sort of overwhelmed by the data that is coming in. There is too much. And so I think you can either just uncritically accept all of it, which is what some people do. You can completely disconnect yourself from that, although I don't see a lot of Amish or Mennonite people in the room here today, so I don't think that's going to happen. Or the most important part is that we need to develop biblical discernment, and I think that's going to be one of the great challenges for us as we minister in the 21st century, to help people really develop an understanding of that. And this is, by the way, happening at a time when we have a fairly high level of biblical illiteracy, but they need to be asking the question, what is being said? Is it true? Is it biblical? And what can I do, or what should I do with that information? I think this is one of the great challenges we're going to face, and I think what we're going to have to do is spend a lot of time talking about discernment, having discernment, using a biblical grid, biblical worldview. Those are going to be very important if we're going to be effective in the 21st century, because a lot of people right now, I think, are overwhelmed by what they're seeing. So the key word I would say is meaning. What does it mean? From a biblical point of view, what does it mean? And what does it mean to me personally? And what should I do with that information?
Would you say that people back in the time of Dr. Schaefer, or back in your generation when you were a millennial, like, did they have a more meaningful life than us? And really, had technology has improved for the quality of our education and the quality of our work today?
Yeah, very good question, because matter of fact, my most recent book is on the millennial generation. A lot of what we're doing is how to reach the millennial generation, those born between 1980 and 2000. And let's, first of all, recognize that every technology gives us tremendous benefits. I mean, just think about this. If you pull out your smartphone, and it is a smartphone, you have access the digital access to all the information on the internet. That is amazing. And that has been a great equalizer. It doesn't matter if you're a professor with the fastest computer in the United States or whether you're in Mumbai and you just are in an internet cafe. You both have access to an incredible wealth of information. That's a really good thing. What also comes with that are mindsets that come around to that. My generation struggled with one thing, and that is once we had calculators, a lot of people said, why do I need to learn the multiplication table? Because my calculator does it for me. This generation, those of you in the younger generation, are starting to say, maybe you're not saying, but your peers are saying, why do I need to learn any history? Why do I need to learn any facts about the world? All I need to do is Google it, right? Because after all, Google knows all, right? And I'll just go to Wikipedia. By the way, don't go to Wikipedia, but anyway, and so you can see the problem. On the one hand, tremendous blessings and benefit. On the other hand, creates sometimes a mindset that is of concern. So was our quality of life better? I think in some respects we are enjoying a quality of life that is unparalleled in the history of the world in terms of our health. And in terms of access to information. I mean, you are really, in a sense, accessing information every day that a person, say, in the 18th century might have accessed in a lifetime. It's possible. It was possible in the time of Thomas Jefferson to really know most of the knowledge of the world. Today, it's hard for you to know the knowledge in one area of specialty. So obviously, there's some differences. But at the same time, we benefit from some of those technological advances. But I think we, as Christians, should evaluate how that technology is influencing us in our spiritual lives. Yes?
Could you offer pointers to evangelists that are clueless about how to use internet for evangelism purposes?
Certainly. Well, the good news is that if you ever go to the National Religious Broadcasters Convention, which would be worthwhile, right now it's in Nashville, but it'll be coming to Dallas again, they actually have whole sessions on internet evangelism. And so there are the various evangelism toolbox resources, and you can find some that have been very effective in that way. 411 God, there's just a whole series of those that have been very effective. And the ones that have been most effective, and there are a lot, so as soon as I try to mention every one of them, I'm going to forget one. They almost always are effective in, number one, identifying how a person might come to the website. That's called search engine optimization. And so they have, over the years, identified the kinds of questions people might be asking when they might be open more to the gospel. Obviously, death, financial reversal, stress in their lives, those kinds of things. And they've been very effective in figuring out how, when somebody does a Google search or a Bing search, how they would ask that question. And then one of the top ones oftentimes shows up with, and I'll just use 411 God as an example, but there are many others. And so I think you can benefit tremendously by some pioneers, many of whom are in Colorado, but in other places in the United States, that have really been effective in using internet evangelism. Now, for your own personal opportunity, if you have a blog or a Facebook post and you have various people that join you, putting things on there that would be attention-getting, certainly pictures, graphics, statistics, and it could be there, it could be in Pinterest, it could be in Instagram. I know some of you think I'm speaking in tongues, but those really are organizations that are out there, and all the rest can be attention-grabbing. But mostly it's trying to think about what that individual, not how you would think about presenting the gospel to them, but questions that might be in their mind that would draw them to your particular website. The other thing I would add is that we are right now in the midst of a real kind of internet battle between the so-called new atheists and the Christians. If you have not seen that, just go out there on the internet a little bit. When I talk about the new atheists, I'm talking about people like, Richard Dawkins when he was alive, Christopher Hitchens, Daniel Dennett, those kind of people. Now, they're not necessarily on the internet, although there are some that are. Matter of fact, some very leading evolutionists have blogs that get lots and lots of people that follow them. But their disciples, if you will, are out there. And they're kind of out there like little bots, looking around for Christian places where they can make their comments. And sometimes if you can make a comment or draw them to your website, that would be another very effective way for evangelism. But I think you had a question, and we're getting close on time, so let's keep moving.
Okay. My question is, what I have heard is media, culture, and how that affect our attention span. So I guess my question is, what's the spiritual perspective of this? Because in the Proverbs, it's oftentimes is talking about, like Proverb 5 verse 1, it says, be attentive to my word of wisdom and listen well to my insight. It involves the mind and the ears. And also Paul talks about inner beings. So what's the spiritual perspective of this? That's the first question. And the second question I'm having is, as an individual, I realize what is happening to me is the media is over there. But my mind is being driven, being attracted to the media. So what can I do to not to be captived? So that's the two questions.
Yeah, very good questions. Let me see what I can try to hit them very quickly. You know, when Paul is writing to Timothy in 2 Timothy 2, verse 22, he says, so flee youthful passions and pursue righteousness, faith, love, and peace, along with those who call on the Lord from a pure heart. And so first of all, he's telling you to flee from those kinds of youthful passions. And in that day, where did those come from? Well, they came more from the culture. Where are they coming from today? In the media. I mean, turn on your television program tonight. Matter of fact, don't turn on your television tonight. I mean, we recognize there are things that you are seeing on television that individuals may have never seen before. Sensuality that you might have seen if you went to, back in the old days, Harry Hines, and went to a porno shop and got a, back then it was videotapes. That was before they had DVDs, and put that in a brown wrapper and bring them into your home. Now you can see that on television, you can see that on the internet. So the first thing is we need to really have an attempt to guard our eyes and our minds, guard our hearts. So certainly I think a wise and discerning Christian is going to reevaluate what he or she sees, reads, and hears. What's coming in your eye gate and ear gate. At the same time, the scriptures tell us that we should focus on those things in Philippians 4:8 that are good and pure and lovely. So we have a very significant number of things. So first of all, Paul tells us to stay away from certain things and then to focus on other things. So I think that would mean that I would certainly want to have enough discernment to make sure that I am not seeing things that are going to be harmful to me. A good way to illustrate that is I put myself through graduate school programming computers, and one of the phrases we used to use was what? Garbage in, garbage out. And that is, I'm not saying that you could never watch a movie or read a book. You could not, for example, some people say, well, could I never read a book that has anger in it? Well, the Bible has anger in it. Can I never read about a book that has sex in it? The Bible has sex in it, David and Bathsheba. No, the point is you pay attention to the impact that it's having in your life. And in my book, Christian Ethics in Plain Language, I go through all sorts of surveys and studies that have been done over the years. But I oftentimes say on radio that we spend millions and millions of dollars on surveys and research studies to tell us what any common sense mom already knows. And that is, watching too much television is not a good thing. Watching too much sex is not a good thing. Watching too much violence is not a good thing. There are all sorts of studies. As a matter of fact, the Journal of the American Psychiatric Association has documented that young girls who watch sex on television are more likely to be sexually involved, more likely to be pregnant. Young boys who watch sex on television are more likely to get sexually involved. Watching violence on television, doing violent video games sometimes results in increased aggression. So I think part of that discernment and part of not being culturally captive is to really reevaluate what you're coming in your eye gate and ear gate. But you look like you want to have a follow-up, so I'm going to give you that follow-up before I make my next point.
I don't know that's really my follow-up, but my question is, seems like what I heard is about it has happened already. I'm in the process of being captive.
Yes.
So I stop and pause and think this is going to have bad influence. I go back. Is there anything we can do from the beginning point
from the beginning point.
Yes.
Yeah, a couple things. First of all, we've just at Probe developed a Once Captive program based on this idea of cultural captive, and it's a program that has 7 sermons, has a book where it has 7 readings each week, so you have 49 messages that are tied into that. It has music, it has video. But we, in the Barna surveys we have done, found that one of the things that turns around this idea of cultural captivity is having an eternal perspective. You know, that whole first sermon is based on 2 Corinthians 4 and 5, for example, and other passages related to that. There is something that sort of creates an aha moment when we have used that. There's a couple of others. We also have a whole section here on spiritual deception, spiritual discernment, those kinds of things, because we have to find a way to sort of break that pattern. And I think that's going to be the real challenge. You have lots of people that you're going to be in churches with, in ministry with, that are pretty much tied to their phones. And I think the real challenge is going to be to how to help them break that media addiction. And even if they don't have a cell phone, which is rare, because 90% of American adults have a cell phone, 60% actually have a smartphone. So pretty much we've had almost full market penetration. Almost every home has a computer. More homes have television sets than have indoor plumbing. There's a joke there, but I'll pass on it. So you were talking about a level of media penetration that we've never seen before. Were you next, I think, and then we'll get over here. And then do I have to end pretty soon? Sure.
How do you think we can reach a generation who thinks with their feelings instead of...
Yeah, and again, that's a presentation. Maybe when I come back here next year, I'll do the one on the millennial generation, because there have been some very good studies that show that, yes, this is a generation that does feel more. In other words, they don't say, well, I think, they say, well, I feel. So obviously emotions are important. But there's another key to that. Relationships are very important as well. The millennial generation probably more relational than the previous generation, certainly more relational than the baby boomer generation. A lot of the baby boomers, when they graduated from high school, said, see ya, they just took off, you know. The millennial generation is still very much connected with their family. Matter of fact, they're the ones that have drawn some of the kids, and the parents have drawn them into Facebook, for example, because they want to see the picture of the kids and the grandkids and all that kind of stuff. So the relational aspect, I think, is one way to deal with that. The other is to recognize that we do have a generation that doesn't really believe in logic, but they use logic every day. On the one hand, they try to reject the law of non-contradiction, which says if the A is true, the opposite of A can't be true at the same time in the same way. They'll say, oh, no, Buddhism is true, and Hinduism is true, and Islam is true, and Christianity is true. But at the same time, they use logic to even communicate that and to help them see some of those issues. Probably one of the best ministries I've seen to help really reach that generation on some of those issues would be Stand to Reason. Greg Kokel, we've had him on the radio program a number of times. Also, I might mention even a recent book that came out by Sean McDowell and John Stonestreet. Sean McDowell, the son of Josh McDowell, John Stonestreet, one of the commentators with Eric Metaxas on the Breakpoint commentary. So I would recommend some resources that I found to be very effective in addressing that issue. And I'll make you the last one because we're just about out of time.
You talked about how our culture is becoming very visually driven. So instead of word-based, linguistic, is the culture that's being visually driven, is that something that the church should kind of just capitulate to, or should, as the church, since we've been known historically to be the people of the book, should we have some pushback to say, like, words still matter? Like, and so how would you answer that?
Yeah, and that would be my quick answer. You deserve a longer answer, but here's my quick answer, and that is oftentimes the church makes a mistake, especially we've seen this some of the seeker churches. Here's where the culture is going, so we'll make the church like the culture. Does that make any sense at all? No, I mean, in some respects, the church needs to counter-program to some of the things in the culture. Recognize the importance of the visual. More and more churches are using PowerPoint and Keynote and visuals and things of that nature. Nothing wrong with that, but I still recognize that the word is important, you know, and the word is communicated in a logical, propositional way, so I think we need to do that. And even when people say, well, I really just kind of like pictures and emotions, we see a whole generation now going to high church experiences, going to liturgy. I mean, so I don't buy the argument as much as we might think. We obviously need to still hold fast to the Scriptures, but there are ways to communicate the Scriptures in ways that will be meaningful every generation. But I don't think we give up on the logical proposition of the Scriptures, systematic theology. That's a good thing because we want to keep teaching that at Dallas Seminary, don't we? Of course we do. But at the same time, I think we can find some creative ways to communicate that as well. Well, a lot of good questions, and let me close this in prayer. Father, we thank you for the opportunity that you give to us to study your word. We thank you for those who have come before us here at Dallas Theological Seminary, and we thank you for the great legacy that they have left to us. We pray, though, now that as we go into this 21st century world, that you would help us to understand what we can and should do to take your word into the world. And we thank you for the way in which this seminary has prepared those before us and is preparing us now. We pray your blessings upon the rest of our day and our weekend and pray this in Christ's name. Amen.